Well, it appears that Moscow is rushing us into World War III. Don't they know that they're putting us all in danger? Fuck it. I need a drink. Good evening, nautical ass clowns, sickbay commandos, retirees, and future draftees. Welcome to this week's exciting episode of Before the Mast, a farcical combination of liquor, sea stories, and art. I am Aaron Burks, your guide through happy hour, which runs every day from whenever I say it starts to whenever I get tired. And buddy, I'm wide awake. Tonight, in honor of Russia kicking off World War III, we're going to enjoy a cocktail where Tsar Nicholas meets Montezuma on a California dairy farm. That's right, friends. Today we're drinking White Russians. Then, if we're all still alive, I'll tell you about the remainder of my time as the Bureau of Land Management's artist in residence. Also, Sunday is my wife and my 22nd anniversary. So I'll treat you to the story of how we met. But first, for this drink, you will need vodka, Kahlua, half and half, and an ice-filled rocks glass. Time to sortie. The Russians are coming. First, you're gonna need your ice-filled rocks glass. First, pour 2 ounces of Kahlua. Then, let the Russians invade by pouring 2 ounces of vodka. Now insert your American self into the orgy of violence by diplomatically pouring in half and half. Now, make like Vladimir Putin and stir that shit up. Yes, you can't beat a good White Russian. Mainly because they say that in World War III, everybody loses. Vaše zdrowie. Tastes like the end of the world. On the other hand, Sunday will be the 22nd year anniversary of being married to the best girl any guy could hope to spend life with. It's hard to believe that it's been 22 years until I look in the mirror and see my gray beard and non-existent hairline. Time marches on. Jess and I got married in Vegas on February 27th, 2000 on a whim. If I had thought better of it, I probably would have waited until the first of the month to get married. But I wasn't thinking ahead. I was thinking ahead. It was a whirlwind romance. We had only met 2 months before, the day I got back from deployment, in fact. On that brisk December 21st, I walked off the brow of the ship and found both my best friends, Luna and Monica, Luna being a former shipmate, on the pier. It was actually the first time anybody had met me on the pier. Being that I had just turned 21 2 months before, I wanted to go to a bar in Hollywood called the Derby, where all the cool people hung out. It was featured in the 1996 movie Swingers, which happened to be one of my favorite movies. So, Monica, Luna, and I crammed ourselves into her little Ford Fiesta and headed north. We got to the Derby and I was ready for my first legal bar experience in the lower 48. But we were stopped at the bottom of the stairs to the bar by a ratty-looking guy who looked like a Depression-era tramp toting an old-fashioned box camera, kind that the photographer has to step under a curtain with to take a picture. But after our triumphant arrival had been properly documented for posterity, we started to ascend the stairs. I looked up to the top and saw a girl behind the podium. Pretty girl. She had bleached blonde finger waves and was wearing a quilted green cocktail dress circa 1948. I looked at my best friend Luna and said, "See, son, why can't I get a girl like that?" Luna stopped and looked at me straight in the face and said, "Because there's no love for you, Burks." I gave the girl $15 to admit all three of my posse into the wonders of the promised land. Inside, a raucous band played Jump Swing. It's pretty crowded in there for a Tuesday, but it's Hollywood. That's just how things were. I ordered a gin and tonic, and we sat in a booth, watching all the Lindy Hoppers drink copious amounts of water between songs. I went to light a cigarette, but Luna slapped it out of my mouth. "Can't smoke inside anymore." I grumbled about goddamn communists and headed for the door. Outside the door was perched on a pedestal like a fragile masterpiece, the Derby Girl. She was reading a book of poetry by Henry Rollins. I lighted my cigarette, started saying something I was certain was supposed to sound smooth, but I'm also certain sounded absolutely ridiculous. And then she stopped me and says, "Sorry, general public has to smoke at the bottom of the stairs." "Well, pardon me," I said, as I started the walk of shame. I realized that it was going to be embarrassingly awkward trying to get back into the bar. I was wondering if there was another way in. But about halfway down, she called out, "Wait!" And I looked up at her with her pretty eyes behind her horn-rimmed glasses, expecting her to tell me that I should also go down the street to the corner. But she asked me instead what my name is. And I was thinking this is probably for the trespassing report. But I told her. She tells me her name is Jessica. And then she says, "There. Now you're not general public." It took me a moment as I looked at her blankly to realize this meant that insofar as the Derby door girl was concerned, I was a cool guy. Part of the in crowd. I climbed back and we made small talk, and eventually I walked back in. I had another drink and then decided it was time for another cigarette. This time I decided to press a little further, but gingerly. In fact, I didn't just beat around the bush. I stomped the surrounding landscape all to beat hell. I said something like, "I would give you my number, but I live on a ship." Let's stop here for a minute. For all you younger kids, this was time BC, before cell phones. Back to the story. I continued, "I could give you a number, but it's to the quarterdeck, and they'd have to track me down." At this point, I didn't even notice that she wasn't even listening anymore and instead scribbling on a piece of paper. "And if they can't find me," I continued, "they'll just tell you I'm not there, so..." She stopped me again. She told me she would give me something if I made her a promise. Without even considering the ramifications of what such an oath would entail, I agreed. And then she says sternly, "Promise that you'll use it." She handed me a piece of paper with her number on it, written in green ink. Well, I was probably a portrait of a kid, circa 1984 Christmas, finding out that Santa brought him the new G.I. Joe aircraft carrier. For the next week, I thought about her. I tried to call her on one occasion, but I couldn't get the outside line on the ship to work. So in the end, I decided I'd just go back and say hi in person. So on December 26th, I got my friend Monica to drive me back to the Derby. Monica had me made from the get. "You just want to go see that girl," she said. And I sheepishly lied and told her, no, that's not what it's about at all. But we got to the Derby, and to my shock and horror, in the place of the cute little lady at the door, there was an overly cool-looking guy with more tattoos than I had at the time. He was smoking a cigarette like he knew where all the cameras were. He nodded. I nodded. Just two cool dudes, measuring each other's coolness. Monica said she's not even here, victoriously. We went inside. I pulled up a stool to a high-top table, and out of nowhere comes Finger Waves. This time she was wearing a white shirt, black pants, and a black tie. I don't know why I expected her to be wearing a green quilted cocktail dress. People don't do that. But this time she had changed her identity to waitress. Monica looked indifferent. Jessica says, you never called me. And I gave her the lame, I'm just a sailor with no real access to phones excuse. She told me to relax, just giving you shit. The night went on. Jessica came up and asked Monica and I if we wanted to go grab a bite to eat after she got off at 1 o'clock in the morning. I looked at Monica, Moni looked at me with eyes that said absolutely not, which Jess read like instructions, and without skipping a beat, Jess says, well, if you don't want to go, I can take him. I promise to bring him back in the morning. I took a sip of my beverage, which was the bar equivalent to the Michael Jackson eating popcorn meme in a volatile Facebook comment section. This, friends, was an estrogen version of a dick measuring contest. Monica stormed out. I gave chase, tried to chase her down, but she sped off into the night. So I walked back in. Now I was just a poor drunken sailor without a phone, without a ride, without a place to stay for the night. But Jessica was my hero, a sailor savior. She took me to dinner at a diner next to the freeway so that I could soak up some of that gin with grease and carbs. And there I met a friend of hers named Freddie, who was in a band. I thought at the time that my friend Beck told a girl that we were in a band just to get in her pants. But it was a fleeting thought, and my mind soon turned back to food. She drove me back to her house in her International Orange 1974 Super Beetle. We're going up a long and dark winding road listening to Patsy Cline, and I felt like we were in the wilderness. That's when she turns to me and asks, you're not an axe murderer or a serial rapist, are you? Me, honest as a Boy Scout and a shot caller, replied, if I was, I'd tell you no anyway. Fair enough, she said. She let me crash on her couch. She let me into her home. I was greeted by a cute black lab and an imposing looking Rottweiler. Both of them came up, tails a wagging. She says, wow, they usually don't react like that. Well, I guess I passed the axe murderer vibe test. The next morning, I was awakened at the hungover, ungodly hour of 9 a.m. by a pounding on the door. My head pounded in time with the knocks. They weren't just any knocks. They were LAPD knocks. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't see anything but fuzz, so I closed one and willed myself to focus towards the door. LAPD! Someone shouted. I couldn't see the door, though, because of a 2-foot-long glass bong on the coffee table, surrounded by piles of marijuana. No, this was before it was legal in the state of California. A lanky hippie with nothing on but tighty-whities came stumbling out. He held on to the dogs and cracked the door open. The cop tried to open the door wider, but the hippie put his foot in the door and jammed it. He let the Rottweiler gratuitously bark and salivate all over the place. Cops were looking for someone who, as it turned out, ended up being the Derby girl's ex-boyfriend. I just put the blanket over my head. I didn't want to be the sailor caught at a pot house. Thankfully, the cops left. The hippie turned around, shocked that I was there. Said hello, I said hello. He introduced himself and said, "You must be one of Jess's friends. I'm her dad." I told him my name was Burks, and he just stumbled back into his room. Jess slept through the whole ordeal. Later that day, Jess took me to Chinatown, and we discussed my eventual return to Monica and San Pedro. I told her that I was not looking forward to that reunion. So Jess said we could just go get my stuff and come back. I agreed that would probably be best. And that's when it happened. Outside Hop Louie's, our lips crashed into each other like those magnet experiments from the 3rd grade. It wasn't my first kiss, sailor, but it was the first one that sent shockwaves through my soul. Somehow, on a Tuesday in Chinatown, I knew that this was it. 2 months later, to the day, Jess and I were at Ruby's at the Fashion Valley Mall. The night before, we had gone to the Navy Ball. I had sunglasses on, shielding my eyes from the sun's temperance-driven accusatory gaze. Dining on a guacamole burger with extra guacamole. Jess asked me what I wanted to do with the day. I told her I didn't have any ideas. So she says, "Want to go to Vegas?" Thought about it for a minute. The very next day, I was going out to sea for 2 weeks. Didn't seem like a good idea. "Sure," I said. When we got there, Jess said she wanted to see how much a marriage license was in Las Vegas. $75. That's how much a marriage license in Las Vegas is. She turned to me and said, "Want to get married?" Now, to be fair, we had already discussed getting married. It was a foregone conclusion. We had rings. We just didn't know it would be happening right now. I said something to the effect of, "We're here, we might as well." The next thing I know, we are standing tall before God's man at the candlelight wedding chapel across the street from Circus Circus. The preacher began, "Marriage!" Jess and I looked at each other because The Princess Bride is one of the best movies ever. But this guy wasn't goofing around. That's just how he talked. After all the pomp and ceremony that a Vegas wedding chapel could muster, went across the street to Circus Circus. But we couldn't linger. It was 10 p.m. and I had to be back on board the ship at 6:15 in the morning. And it was still a good 4.5 hours away. Drove like the wind with a brief stop on a side street in Victorville, and just like that, I left her for the sea for the first of many times. My only regret? Getting married 2 days before payday. Makes anniversaries difficult. Other than that, I could not have hoped for a better, more beautiful, nicer, sweeter, more loving girl to spend my life with. Cheers, Jess. I love you more than Putin loves disturbing the balance of peace. Cheers to the rest of you salty bastards. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story time with boats. I'm not usually mushy, but Jess makes me kind of squishy inside. Still crusty on the outside, though. Cheers.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? Early in the morning, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises. Early in the morning, put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Early in the morning.
God, Putin, you're such a dick.
Rises,